The kitchen clock struck 9:30 p.m. when Emma Rose Mitchell finally finished washing the last dinner plates. Her hands, roughened by years of domestic work, trembled slightly as she dried the fine porcelain that cost more than 3 months of her salary. The mansion was wrapped in absolute silence, interrupted only by the refrigerator's hum and the constant ticking of the wall clock. Mr. Sterling had left early that morning for an important business meeting downtown and, as always, hadn't returned until very late. The other staff members had already gone home, leaving her completely alone in this immense kitchen that seemed larger than the entire house where she'd grown up in rural Virginia. Emma sighed deeply, feeling the weight of loneliness settle on her shoulders like a heavy, cold blanket. At 28, she'd been working in this Miami Beach mansion for 5 years and had never gotten used to the feeling of living surrounded by someone else's luxury. The white marble walls and stainless steel appliances stared back at her with indifference, constantly reminding her of her place in this world. She put away the last plate in its proper spot and removed the navy blue apron she wore every day. Her hazel eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. Today was her birthday, and once again she would celebrate it completely alone. With tired steps, Emma walked to her small room in the back of the mansion. The space was modest but clean, with a twin bed, a small wooden desk, and a cross hanging on the wall that reminded her of her late grandmother's teachings. She opened the drawer of her nightstand and took out a small metal box where she kept her savings. With trembling fingers, she counted the crumpled bills and coins she'd collected over the past few weeks. She had just enough to buy herself a small cupcake from Miss Baker's bakery a few blocks from the mansion. She changed out of her uniform into a simple olive green dress and put on her favorite cardigan, the same one her mother used to wear before she died. The bathroom mirror reflected back a young but tired woman with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights, thinking about an uncertain future. She pulled her long chestnut hair into a low ponytail and pinched her cheeks to give them some color. "Happy birthday, Emma," she murmured to her reflection, attempting to smile. The smile didn't reach her eyes, but it was the best she could manage at that moment. The Miami night air was warm and humid when Emma stepped out through the mansion's back door. The city lights gleamed in the distance, but in this exclusive residential area, everything was shrouded in an almost sepulchral tranquility. She walked along the cobblestone streets, passing other equally imposing mansions, each protected by high walls and perfectly manicured gardens. The ocean breeze carried with it the scent of the Atlantic, mixed with the perfume of tropical flowers adorning the gardens. Emma pressed her cardigan against her chest, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and melancholy. She remembered her childhood birthdays when her mother would make her a homemade chocolate cake, and the whole family would gather in their small farmhouse. Those times seemed so distant now, as if they belonged to someone else's life. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was barely 18, and since then, she'd been completely alone in the world. She had no siblings, no aunts or uncles, no close cousins who could accompany her on special dates like this. Loneliness had become her most faithful companion, though not by choice. Mr. Baker's bakery was about to close when Emma arrived. The elderly baker, with his white mustache and kind smile, greeted her warmly, as always. "Good evening, Emma. What brings you here so late?" he asked while cleaning the glass counter. Emma timidly pointed to a small individual vanilla cake that remained in the display case, decorated with a tiny pink frosting rosette. It's my birthday, Mr. Baker," she confessed in a low voice, blushing slightly. The old man's face immediately lit up. "Oh, my dear girl, why didn't you tell me earlier? I would have prepared something special for you," he exclaimed, with genuine affection. Emma shook her head, thanking him for his kindness, but explaining she didn't want to cause any trouble. Mr. Baker wrapped the cupcake with special care and gifted her a small white candle he had saved. "So you can make a wish," he said with a wink. Emma paid with exact change and profusely thanked the elderly man's kindness. As she returned to the mansion, she hugged the small box against her chest, as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world. Back in the mansion's kitchen, Emma placed the small cake on the wooden table, where she usually ate breakfast alone. The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through the large window. She lit the candle with trembling hands, and for a moment, the small golden flame seemed to fill the entire space with its warmth. She sat in the wooden chair and contemplated her modest celebration. The cupcake looked tiny on the table, but for her it represented an act of resistance against the loneliness that threatened to consume her. She closed her eyes and made the same wish she'd made for the past 10 years, to not feel so alone in the world. A tear rolled down her cheek as she blew out the candle, and the kitchen returned to darkness. "Happy birthday, Emma," she whispered to herself, cutting a small piece of the cake. The vanilla flavor mixed with the saltiness of her tears, but she continued eating slowly, savoring each bite. In the stillness of the night, only the sound of her labored breathing and the distant murmur of the ocean could be heard. But what she didn't know was that someone else was about to arrive home. The black Mercedes-Benz stopped smoothly in front of the mansion's main entrance, and Alexander Sterling stepped out of the vehicle with shoulders tense from the stress of a meeting that had extended much longer than anticipated. At 42, he owned one of the most successful hotel chains on the East Coast, but success had come at a very high price. He loosened his Italian silk tie and breathed deeply, trying to release the tension accumulated during the last 12 hours of intense negotiations. The night breeze moved his black hair, slightly graying at the temples, and for a moment he allowed himself to enjoy the silence surrounding his home. His driver said goodbye respectfully and drove away, leaving him alone in front of the imposing white marble facade that had been his refuge for the past 8 years. He put the keys in his dark gray suit pocket and walked toward the main entrance, but something stopped him. Through the kitchen windows filtered a faint golden light that flickered as if it were the reflection of a candle. He frowned, puzzled. All the staff should have finished their shift hours ago. His curiosity awakened, and he decided to investigate what was happening. Alexander walked around the mansion along the side path, where jasmine perfumed the night air with its intoxicating aroma. His Italian leather shoes stepped softly on the pathway stones to avoid making noise. As he approached the kitchen windows, he could make out a silhouette sitting at the table. His heart accelerated slightly, thinking about the possibility of an intruder, but when he managed to see more clearly, he immediately recognized Emma's figure. She was sitting alone in front of what appeared to be a small cake, with a lit candle. Alexander stopped dead, feeling as if he'd witnessed something deeply intimate and private. The image hit him like a punch to the stomach. Emma looked so small and vulnerable in that immense kitchen, surrounded by all the opulence he'd accumulated over the years. The candlelight illuminated her face with a golden softness, and he could see a tear rolling down her cheek as she blew out the small flame. In that moment, Alexander understood he was witnessing a completely solitary birthday celebration. His throat closed with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. During the 5 years Emma had worked for him, Alexander had barely paid attention to her personal life. He knew she was efficient, discreet, and reliable, but he'd never stopped to think about who she was beyond her functions as a domestic employee. He saw her every morning when he had breakfast before going to work, always impeccably uniformed, always with a polite, professional smile. She answered his questions with monosyllables, kept the house in perfect condition, and never complained about anything. But now, seeing her celebrate her birthday in complete solitude, he realized how little he knew about the woman who cared for his home day after day. A pang of guilt pierced him as he recognized that in all these years he'd never asked her about her family, her dreams, or even when her birthday was. He'd been so absorbed in building his business empire that he'd completely forgotten about the humanity of the people around him. The image of Emma, eating her small cake alone, was etched in his memory like a photograph he could never erase. For the first time in a long while, he felt his wealth meant nothing if he couldn't share it with someone who truly mattered. Alexander remained motionless for several minutes, watching Emma slowly eat her cake while tears silently ran down her cheeks. The scene awakened painful memories of his own solitary birthdays after his wife, Isabella, died in a traffic accident 3 years ago. He remembered how he'd spent his last birthday locked in his office, working until late hours to avoid returning home and facing the mansion's emptiness. The irony didn't escape him. He, a man who had everything materially speaking, lived in the same loneliness as his domestic employee. The difference was that he'd chosen to isolate himself from the world after his loss, while Emma seemed to be alone due to circumstances beyond her control. A strange sensation took hold of him, something like compassion but deeper, more personal. It was as if he were seeing a reflection of his own fractured soul in that woman's tearful eyes, who'd been under his same roof for so long without him truly seeing her. His heart, which had remained frozen for years, began to beat with an intensity that surprised him. He knew in that instant he couldn't simply walk away and pretend he hadn't witnessed that intimate and heartbreaking moment. With careful steps, Alexander headed toward the kitchen's back door. His hands trembled slightly when he turned the handle, and the soft creak of the opening door made Emma look up, startled. Their eyes met through the dimness, and for a moment, time stopped completely. Emma immediately stood up, quickly wiping the tears with the back of her hand, and nervously smoothing her olive green dress with evident embarrassment. "Mr. Sterling, I didn't know you'd returned," she stammered with a trembling voice, clearly embarrassed at having been discovered in her most vulnerable moment. Alexander gently closed the door behind him and took a step forward, without looking away from her eyes swollen from crying. "Don't worry, Emma," he murmured with a softness in his voice. He didn't recognize himself. "I just wanted to." He paused, searching for the right words. His gaze went to the half-eaten small cake on the table, then returned to her hazel eyes that shone with a mixture of shame and sadness. In that moment, something fundamental changed inside him, as if a door he'd kept closed for years opened wide. Alexander made a decision that surprised even himself, but what would happen next would change both their lives forever. Alexander observed the small cake on the table, and then directed his gaze back to Emma, who looked like she wanted to disappear from the place. The air between them felt charged with a strange tension, a mixture of embarrassment on her part and an unexpected tenderness on his. "Is it your birthday?" he asked with a soft voice, though he already knew the answer. Emma barely nodded, unable to hold his gaze. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. I apologize for using the kitchen for this. I was about to leave," she murmured while nervously beginning to collect the cake crumbs. Her hands visibly trembled, and Alexander noticed she was wearing a simple but pretty dress, very different from the uniform she usually wore. The olive green fabric brought out the golden color of her eyes, something he'd never observed before. "You don't need to apologize," he told her as he slowly approached the table. "This is your home too." The words came out of his mouth before he could think them through, and both were surprised by the intimacy they conveyed. Emma looked up at him, bewildered by the unexpected kindness in his tone. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them while Alexander struggled internally with a decision he knew would forever change the dynamic of their relationship. He'd spent the last 3 years building emotional walls around himself, keeping distant from any genuine human connection, but something in the image of Emma celebrating her birthday alone had touched a part of him he believed completely dead. He took off his suit jacket and hung it over the back of a chair, a gesture Emma interpreted as a signal he had no intention of leaving soon. "Emma," he began, and the way he pronounced her name without the formal miss he usually employed made her shiver. May I sit with you?" The question floated in the air like a vulnerable plea, and Emma felt the world stop around her. Never in 5 years of working for him had she seen Mr. Sterling show himself so human, so stripped of the authority that normally characterized him. His eyes, which had always been distant and businesslike, now shone with something she couldn't identify but that deeply moved her. I don't think it would be appropriate, Mr. Sterling." Emma responded with a barely audible voice, lowering her gaze to her intertwined hands. "You're my employer and I'm just—" "No," he interrupted softly. "Tonight I'm not your employer. Tonight I'm just Alexander, a man who feels very lonely and who just realized he's not the only one." The brutal honesty of his words hit Emma like a wave. She looked up and met his gray eyes, which now seemed vulnerable in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Please," he insisted, pointing to the empty chair in front of her. "Don't make me celebrate my loneliness alone while you celebrate yours." The paradox of the situation wasn't lost on Emma. The richest man she knew was asking her permission to accompany her in her humble celebration. After a moment of doubt, she slowly nodded and sat back down, not looking away from him as he took a seat across from her. The space between them felt intimate in a way neither had experienced in a long time. Alexander settled into the wooden chair, aware of how strange it was to be sitting in his own house's kitchen, as if he were a guest. The last time he'd been in this room for more than 5 minutes had been years ago, when Isabella was still alive and they cooked together on Sunday mornings. "How old are you turning?" he asked, trying to break the tension still floating in the air. 28, Emma responded, cutting a small piece of cake with the plastic fork she'd brought from the bakery. "And you, Mr. Sterling?" The question took him by surprise. In his entire adult life, very few people had taken the trouble to ask him about himself in a personal way. 42, he responded, then added with a melancholic smile. "My birthday was 2 months ago. I spent it working in the office until 2 in the morning." The confession emerged spontaneously, and Emma felt a pang of empathy imagining that powerful man celebrating alone among files and contracts. "I'm so sorry," she murmured sincerely. No one should spend their birthday alone. The words resonated between them with special weight, because both knew they perfectly described their respective realities. Emma divided the last piece of cake in half, and with a timid but brave gesture slid a portion toward Alexander. "Would you like some?" she asked, immediately blushing at her boldness. "I don't have another fork, but—" Alexander stopped her with a genuine smile, the first real smile he'd shown in months. "I'd love to," he responded, taking the plastic fork from her hands. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, and both felt an electric current that startled them. Alexander tasted the cake and closed his eyes, savoring not only the vanilla sweetness, but also the strange sensation of sharing something so simple, yet so significant. "It's delicious," he commented, and Emma smiled for the first time all night, a timid but genuine smile that completely illuminated her face. "It's from Mr. Baker's bakery in the neighborhood," she explained. "He always makes the best cakes." Alexander nodded, but his attention was completely focused on how Emma's eyes sparkled when she smiled, and how that smile completely transformed her appearance. In that moment, sharing a humble bakery cake in the kitchen at midnight, both felt something they hadn't experienced in years, a genuine human connection that neither knew how to handle. "Tell me about yourself, Emma," Alexander said after finishing his portion of cake, leaning back slightly in his chair while observing her with attention that made her nervous. "In 5 years working here, I realize I know practically nothing about who cares for my home every day." The request took her completely off guard. She'd spent so much time being invisible, being just a pair of efficient hands that kept everything in order, that the idea of talking about herself seemed almost strange. "There's not much to tell, Mr. Sterling," she responded modestly, playing with the edge of her dress. "I'm just a simple woman who needs to work to live." But he shook his head, leaning forward with genuine interest. "That's not true. Every person has a story, Emma. Where are you from? Do you have family?" The questions, formulated with unexpected gentleness, opened an emotional floodgate Emma had kept closed for years. Her eyes moistened again, but this time she didn't look away. "I come from a small town near Charlottesville, Virginia," she began with a trembling voice. "My parents had a small farm where we grew corn and vegetables." Emma's story poured out slowly like water flowing through a dry riverbed. She told him about her humble but happy childhood, where celebrations were simple but full of love. "My mom always made me a homemade chocolate cake for my birthday," she remembered with a nostalgic smile. "It was small, but she'd decorate it with flowers from the garden and sing happy birthday to me along with my dad." Alexander listened to every word with attention. Emma had never experienced from anyone. "It sounds beautiful," he commented softly. What happened to them? The inevitable question arrived like a soft but painful blow. Emma breathed deeply before continuing. They died when I was 18. There was an accident on the highway when they were returning from the market in Charlottesville. Her voice broke slightly, but she found strength to continue. After that, I had to sell the farm to pay the debts and funeral expenses. I was left completely alone. Alexander felt a knot in his stomach, hearing the raw honesty of her account. And since then you've been working as a domestic employee. Emma nodded. It's the only thing I know how to do well. I learned from my mom how to care for a house, to cook, to clean. Have you never had a boyfriend? Someone special? Alexander's question arose with a curiosity he himself didn't know how to explain, but that consumed him inside. Emma blushed deeply and shook her head. I've worked in 5 different houses before arriving here. I've always been focused on earning enough to survive. Besides, she added with a bitter laugh, what man would want to be with a woman who has no family, no education, no money? Her words revealed a damaged self-esteem Alexander immediately recognized, because he himself had felt something similar after Isabella's death. And dreams? He asked, deliberately ignoring her rhetorical question. What do you dream about for your future? Emma looked at him with surprise, as if no one had ever asked her that question. I used to dream of having a family, she confessed in a low voice. A small house, a husband who loved me, maybe a child or two. But I'm already 28 years old. 28 isn't old, Alexander interrupted firmly. You have your whole life ahead of you. But Emma sadly shook her head. For someone like me, it is. Women from my town marry young. At my age, I'm already a spinster. Alexander felt a mixture of indignation and sadness. Hearing how Emma belittled herself. Do you know what I see when I look at you? He asked, surprising her with the intensity of his gaze. I see a strong woman who has survived devastating losses. I see someone who maintains my house as if it were a palace, who never complains, who always has a kind smile even when the world has been cruel to you. Emma blinked rapidly, overwhelmed by words she'd never expected to hear, especially from him. I see a woman who deserves to be celebrated, not just one day a year, but every day of her life. The silence that followed his words was dense and charged with emotions. Emma didn't know what to respond because no one had ever spoken to her like that. Why are you saying this to me, Mr. Sterling? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because it's the truth, he responded without hesitation. And because I think we've both been blind to what we had right in front of us. The confession floated between them, like a revelation that would change everything. Emma felt her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. I don't understand, she murmured, though deep in her soul, she began to glimpse something that terrified and excited her at the same time. Emma, Alexander said, slowly extending his hand across the table until he softly touched hers. In 3 years of widowhood, I haven't felt anything for anyone. I've been completely empty inside, functioning like a machine without a soul. But tonight, seeing you celebrate your birthday alone, hearing your story, seeing your strength, something woke up in me. His words made Emma feel dizzy. What are you trying to tell me? She asked, though her intuition already knew the answer. I'm telling you that during these 5 years, while I lived like a ghost in my own house, the most extraordinary woman was right here, caring for me without my knowing it. Alexander gently squeezed her hand. I'm telling you that for the first time in years, I don't feel alone. Emma abruptly pulled back her hand, standing up with agitation. You can't say those things, she exclaimed, her voice trembling between fear and hope. You're Alexander Sterling, hotel owner, millionaire, and I'm just a maid. But Alexander also stood up, maintaining a respectful distance, but with determination in his gray eyes. Tonight I'm none of those things, Emma. Tonight I'm just a man who just discovered something he didn't know he was looking for. Tears ran freely down Emma's face, who didn't know if she was living a beautiful dream or a nightmare that would destroy her. Emma backed up until her back touched the wall. her hazel eyes shining with tears of confusion. "This can't be happening," she murmured, bringing her hands to her face. "It must be a cruel joke. Or, or maybe you drank something at that meeting." Alexander took a step toward her, but stopped upon seeing her expression of panic. "Emma, look at me," he asked with a soft but firm voice. "Do I seem drunk to you? Do I seem like I'm playing with you?" His gray eyes looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "I don't know what to think," she confessed, slowly sliding down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. "In 5 years you'd never spoken more than 10 words in a row to me, and now you're telling me you feel something." Alexander crouched in front of her, maintaining a respectful distance. "You're right, and that's exactly what shames me," he admitted. "I've been blind, an idiot who was so lost in his own pain that he didn't see the kindness he had every day in front of him. But you had a beautiful wife, successful, from your same social level," Emma continued, drying her cheeks with the back of her hand. "How can you compare that with this?" Alexander sighed deeply before responding. "Isabella was everything you say, but our relationship was built on social conveniences. We married because our families expected us to, because we looked good together in society magazines." He sat on the floor in front of her, wrinkling his expensive suit without caring. "I loved her, yes, but I never felt with her what I'm feeling with you in these few hours." Emma looked at him with disbelief. "And what is it that you're feeling?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Peace," Alexander responded, without hesitation. "For the first time in 3 years, my mind is quiet. I'm not thinking about contracts, about money, about obligations. I just exist here with you in this moment." The words were like a balm for Emma's wounded heart, but they also awakened in her a profound terror. Alexander slowly extended his hand toward her, giving her time to reject it if she so desired. Emma hesitated for a moment before taking his fingers with hers. "I feel your hands roughened by work," he murmured, "and they seem to me the most beautiful hands I've ever touched." She shivered at the compliment. "Do you know why?" Alexander continued. "Because these hands have worked honestly, have cared for others, have turned this house into a home, without my realizing it." Emma felt her resistance beginning to crumble. "Mr. Sterling." "Just Alexander," he corrected softly. "At least tonight, just call me Alexander." "Alexander," she repeated, and the name sounded strange but sweet on her lips. "What's going to happen tomorrow when the sun comes up, and you go back to being the boss and I the employee?" The question was valid and painful. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "But I do know I don't want to go back to being the empty man I was this morning." A comfortable silence settled between them, as they remained sitting on the kitchen floor holding hands. Emma observed his face in the dimness, noticing for the first time the small wrinkles around his eyes, the tension he habitually carried in his shoulders. "Why don't you ever smile?" she suddenly asked. Alexander looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "In 5 years working here, I think I've seen you genuinely smile only once," Emma explained. "Today, when you tried the cake, the observation hit him like a revelation." "I haven't had many reasons to smile," he responded thoughtfully. "After Isabella died, I think I forgot how to do it." Emma felt a pang of compassion. "The same thing happens to me," she confessed. "I smile out of politeness, for work, but really smiling, I don't remember that anymore." They looked into each other's eyes and both recognized in the other the same wound, the same emptiness. "Maybe we can remember together," Alexander whispered. Emma felt her heart accelerate dangerously. "Alexander," she murmured, using his name for the second time. "I'm scared." "Of what?" he asked, gently squeezing her hand. "Of everything. Of this, of what I'm feeling, of waking up tomorrow and discovering this was all a dream." Her vulnerability completely disarmed. "Alexander, I'm scared too," he confessed. "Scared of feeling again, of risking my heart again. But I'm more scared of letting you go without trying." They slowly stood up, without releasing hands. What do you propose then? Emma asked, looking directly into his eyes. That we give ourselves a chance. Alexander responded. That we discover what this is that's growing between us. Emma closed her eyes, fighting against all the fears and doubts assaulting her. When she opened them, she'd made a decision. Okay, she whispered, but with one condition. Whatever it is, he responded immediately. That you're completely honest with me always. If this is just curiosity or boredom, tell me now. Alexander released her hand, only to softly touch her face. Emma, I swear this is the most real thing I've felt in my life. 3 days had passed since that night in the kitchen, and Alexander couldn't concentrate on anything but Emma. During the morning meeting with his managers, he found himself thinking about the way she'd pronounced his name, about the vulnerability of her smile. Mr. Sterling. His assistant's voice brought him back to reality. I was asking if you approved the budget for the lobby renovation. Alexander blinked, completely lost. Yes, of course, he responded automatically, having no idea what he was approving. His employees exchanged worried looks. In 15 years working for him, they'd never seen him so distracted. Are you all right, boss? Asked his right-hand man, Robert. Perfectly, Alexander lied, standing up from the table. We'll continue this meeting tomorrow. He left the conference room ignoring his team's expressions of surprise. He only had one thing on his mind: returning home and seeing Emma. During the drive to the mansion, Alexander fought against a nervousness he hadn't felt since adolescence. How should he behave with her? Had anything really changed, or had that night been just a moment of temporary madness? Upon arriving home, he heard the sound of the vacuum cleaner upstairs. Normally he would have gone directly up to his study, but now everything had changed. Instead, he headed to the kitchen, where he knew Emma would take her mid-afternoon break. He removed his tie and rolled up his shirt sleeves, trying to look less formal. When Emma came down 20 minutes later, she was surprised to find him sitting at the table with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Mr. Sterling, she murmured, stopping in the doorway. Alexander, he corrected softly, standing to pull out a chair for her. I thought maybe you could join me for coffee. Emma looked at the cups with surprise. It was the first time in 5 years he'd offered her a seat at his table. Are you sure? She asked timidly. Very sure, he responded with a smile that made her blush. The conversation flowed more naturally than the first night, though both were conscious of the unexplored territory they were entering. Alexander asked her about her day, about the books she read in her free time, about her favorite foods. Emma initially responded with monosyllables, but gradually relaxed. You really read Emily Dickinson? Alexander asked, genuinely impressed. Yes, Emma responded, blushing. I found a book of hers in the house's library. I hope you don't mind that I borrowed it. Not at all. The library is there to be used, he assured her. What's your favorite poem? Emma recited from memory some verses of Hope is the Thing with Feathers, and Alexander listened fascinated, not only by the words, but by the passion she put into reciting them. You're extraordinary, he murmured, when she finished. How is it possible that for 5 years I haven't noticed the intelligent and cultured woman I had in my home? Emma lowered her gaze, still not accustomed to his compliments. Because I didn't allow it, she admitted. I learned to be invisible. Well, I don't want you to be invisible anymore, Alexander declared, taking her hand across the table. I want to know you, Emma. I want to know what you think, what you feel, what makes you laugh. His words provoked a revolution in Emma's heart. This is very confusing for me, she confessed. I don't know how to behave. For 5 years I was your employee, and now you're the woman who's giving me back my life. Alexander completed. The comment left her breathless. Can I ask you something? He continued. Anything, Emma responded automatically. Tomorrow is Saturday. There are no other employees in the house. Would you like to have lunch with me? Not in the kitchen, but in the main dining room. The proposal immediately alarmed her. I can't do that. What will the neighbors think if they see me? Alexander frowned. What will they think about what? About a domestic employee having lunch in her employer's dining room. As if I were. As if you were what, Emma? He pressed gently. As if I were your equal, she finished in a whisper. Alexander stood up and walked around the table to kneel beside her chair. Emma, look at me, he asked, taking her hands in his. You are my equal. More than that, you're better than me in many ways. She shook her head, but he continued. You're more generous, more hardworking, more authentic. You have an inner beauty that can't be bought with all the money in the world. Tears began to roll down Emma's cheeks. Don't say those things if you don't truly feel them, she pleaded. Because if tomorrow you change your mind, you're going to destroy me. Alexander moved closer until their faces were inches apart. Emma, I swear on my parents' memory that every word I'm telling you is true. He looked directly into her eyes. Will you have lunch with me tomorrow? Emma closed her eyes, fighting against all her fears and insecurities. When she opened them, she found in Alexander's gaze something that reassured her. Pure honesty. Yes, she finally whispered. I'll have lunch with you. The smile that illuminated Alexander's face was so radiant that Emma knew in that moment her life had just changed forever. Saturday arrived with a radiant sun filtering through Emma's bedroom windows, but she couldn't feel its warmth. She'd spent the entire night awake, mulling over the conversation with Alexander. She got out of bed and looked at herself in the small mirror on her dresser. What would she wear for lunch in the main dining room? Her dresses were all simple, appropriate for domestic work, nothing worthy of sitting at the table where Alexander received important business people. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of reality falling on her like an avalanche. What was I thinking? She murmured to herself. How could I believe this could work? The difference between them was abysmal. Not only in money, but in education, in social class, in everything. Alexander had studied at the best universities, spoke several languages, traveled the world. She'd barely finished high school before her parents died. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Emma, it was Alexander's voice. May I come in? She hurried to put on a robe and timidly opened the door. Good morning, she murmured, unable to look him in the eyes. Alexander immediately noticed her nervousness. Is everything all right? He asked with concern. Emma hesitated for a moment before responding. Alexander, I think I made a mistake yesterday. The words came out of her mouth before she could stop them. I can't have lunch with you in the dining room. It's not right. Alexander frowned. Why isn't it right? Because you're you and I'm me, she responded, finally lifting her gaze toward him. Because if someone saw us, they'd think terrible things. Alexander took another step closer. What kind of terrible things, Emma? His voice had a tone she couldn't interpret. That you're using me. That I'm your... She stopped, blushing intensely. That you're my what? Alexander pressed gently. Emma breathed deeply before continuing. Your mistress of the moment, your whim, your entertainment, while you find someone from your level. The words were like stabs to Alexander's heart. Is that what you really think of me? He asked, and for the first time since she'd known him, Emma detected genuine pain in his voice. I don't know, she admitted honestly. I don't know what to think. Alexander, this is very new for me and very confusing. She moved away from him, walking toward the window. All my life I've known what my place in the world was. I'm a domestic employee, and now you come along and tell me all these beautiful things that make me dream of impossibilities. Alexander approached from behind, but without touching her. What if they weren't impossible? He whispered. What if it were real? Emma turned to face him, her eyes shining with contained tears. For how long, Alexander? A week, a month, until you get bored of playing at being poor. Emma's accusation hit Alexander like a slap. For a moment he was speechless, processing the depth of pain hidden behind her words. Emma, he began slowly. I understand you're afraid. I understand this is confusing, but what hurts me is that you think so badly of me. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly frustrated. Do you really think I'm capable of playing with someone's feelings like that? She stared at him, fixedly, searching his eyes for any sign of deception. I don't know, she repeated. Rich people have always had their fun with the help. It's something that's happened forever. Alexander felt a mixture of indignation and sadness. I'm not rich people, Emma. I'm Alexander, the man who fell in love with you that night in the kitchen. The word fell in love floated in the air like a bomb that had exploded between them. Emma froze. What did you say? She whispered. Alexander approached slowly. I said I fell in love with you. His voice was firm without hesitation. No, Emma shook her head, backing up. You can't be in love with me. It's impossible. Why is it impossible? Alexander asked, following her until she was cornered between the window and him. Because you don't really know me, she responded desperately. Because I'm poor. Because I don't have an education. Because you're the most authentic woman I've met in my life, Alexander interrupted. Because when you talk about Emily Dickinson, your eyes light up in a way that takes my breath away. Because you work 16 hours a day without ever complaining. Because you have such a noble heart that you preferred to celebrate your birthday alone rather than bother anyone. Alexander's words made Emma emotionally collapse. Stop, she pleaded between sobs. Stop, please. Don't make me fall in love with you two. Because when you get tired of me, you're going to destroy me. Alexander felt his heart break in two seeing her vulnerability. Emma, look at me, he asked, softly taking her face in his hands. I promise you I'll never get tired of you. I promise you this is real. But Emma abruptly pulled away, drying her tears with the back of her hand. You can't promise me that, she said with a broken voice. No one can promise that, and I can't risk my job, my stability, my heart for a fantasy. Alexander felt he was losing the most important battle of his life. Is that what I am to you? A fantasy? Emma looked at him with eyes full of pain. You're a beautiful dream, Alexander. But dreams don't pay rent, don't put food on the table, don't give security. She headed toward her room's door. I think it's better if things go back to the way they were. You and your world, me and mine. Alexander stopped her before she could leave. No, he said firmly. I'm not going to allow fear to rob us of this opportunity. He looked directly into her eyes. I'm going to prove to you this is real, Emma. I'm going to prove to you that you deserve to be loved like the queen you are. But Emma had already made a decision that would change everything between them. The following days were a sweet torture for both. Emma had returned to her routine as an efficient and invisible employee. But Alexander wasn't willing to give up so easily. Monday morning, while she was cleaning the library, she found a white rose on the shelf where she usually placed the duster. There was no note, but Emma immediately knew who had left it there. Her heart raced as she inhaled the delicate perfume of the flower. For 5 years she'd cleaned that room without anyone leaving anything special for her. She quickly hid it in her apron when she heard footsteps approaching. Good morning, Emma. Alexander greeted as he entered the library with a smile she pretended not to see. Good morning, Mr. Sterling, she responded formally, returning to the professional treatment that hurt him so much. Did you find everything in order here? He asked casually. Emma felt her cheeks burn. Yes, sir. Everything is perfect. Alexander nodded and left, but not before giving her a look that clearly said, this isn't over. Tuesday, a small book of poetry by Robert Frost appeared on her bed, with a dedication written in Alexander's elegant calligraphy, for the woman who brought poetry back to my life. Emma read and reread it until she'd memorized it, but she didn't say anything when they crossed paths in the hallways. Wednesday, she found a note in the kitchen that read, Your morning coffee is the best part of my days. Thank you for taking such good care of this house and of me. Thursday, Alexander began having breakfast in the kitchen instead of the formal dining room. I hope you don't mind, he said the first time. I prefer the atmosphere here. Emma served his coffee without looking him in the eyes, but he noticed how her hands trembled slightly. How did you sleep? He would ask every morning. Fine, thank you, Mr. Sterling, she would invariably respond. But both knew neither had slept well since that night on the kitchen floor. The air between them was charged with unspoken words and repressed feelings. Friday. Alexander decided to intensify his strategy. That day he'd invited some American business partners to lunch at home to discuss a possible expansion of his hotels. Emma was serving the food when one of the men made a derogatory comment in English about Mexican help, assuming she wouldn't understand. These people are only good for cleaning and serving. They don't understand real business. Alexander immediately stiffened. "Excuse me," he said in English with a voice cold as ice. "I don't allow disrespectful comments about my staff in my house." The man blushed, stammering an apology, but Alexander continued. "Emma is not help. She's an intelligent, educated woman who runs this house better than most CEOs run their companies." Emma froze, hearing how he defended her in front of those important men. "Perhaps you should reconsider who you choose to disrespect," Alexander added, his tone making clear the business meeting had ended. The guests left uncomfortably, and Emma remained in the dining room staring at Alexander with eyes full of tears of gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," Emma told him after the men had left. "You could have lost an important deal." Alexander loosened his tie and looked at her intensely. "Emma, listen to me well. There's no business in the world worth more than your dignity." He slowly approached her. "And let no one speak badly of you in my presence again." His voice trembled with contained emotion. Emma felt her defenses crumbling. "Why do you do these things?" she whispered. "Why do you defend me? Why do you leave me flowers? Why?" "Because I love you," Alexander interrupted without hesitation. "Because every day that passes I fall more in love with you. Because seeing that idiot belittle you made me want to kick him out of my house." Emma brought her hands to her face, overwhelmed. "Alexander, I know you're afraid," he continued. "I know this is complicated, but I also know you feel something for me. I see it in your eyes every time you look at me when you think I don't notice." Emma couldn't deny it anymore. Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she slowly nodded. "You're right," she admitted with a broken voice. "I feel something for you, something that scares me and excites me at the same time." Alexander took another step toward her, his heart beating like a drum. "And what is it that you feel, Emma?" She looked up at him, her hazel eyes shining with a mixture of love and terror. "I love you," she finally whispered. "God, I love you so much it hurts." The words were like celestial music to Alexander's ears. Unable to contain himself anymore, he shortened the distance between them and softly took her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Emma closed her eyes and barely nodded, and Alexander leaned in slowly until their lips met in a sweet, tender kiss, full of all the passion contained for days. When they separated, both were trembling. "I love you, Emma," he murmured against her lips. "I love you more than I thought possible." Emma clung to him as if he were her lifeline. "I love you too, Alexander, but I'm still so scared." Alexander hugged her tightly, feeling how she melted in his arms. "I know, my love. I'm scared too," he confessed. "Scared of not being enough for you. Scared that one day you'll realize you deserve someone better." Emma separated slightly to look into his eyes. "Better than you? Alexander, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Her words were like balm for his wounded soul. "Then, will you give me a chance?" "Will you give us a chance?" he asked, softly caressing her cheek. Emma breathed deeply, feeling she was about to jump into the void. "Yes," she finally murmured. "Yes, I want to try with you." Alexander smiled with a happiness he hadn't felt in years. "I promise I'm going to take care of you, that I'm going to respect you, that I'm going to love you the way you deserve to be loved." He kissed her again, sealing a promise that would change their lives forever. But what they didn't know was that their love was about to be tested in the most beautiful way possible. A full year had passed since that magical night in the kitchen, and the love between Emma and Alexander had blossomed like the tropical flowers of Miami. They'd kept their relationship secret, stealing intimate moments in the mansion, romantic dinners at restaurants far from downtown, walks on solitary beaches at dawn. Emma had stopped being just the domestic employee. Now she was the confidant, the companion, the true love of Alexander. But they still lived in separate worlds in the public eye. She still slept in her small room, he in the main suite. She still wore a uniform during the day, transforming into the woman he loved only in the intimacy of their encounters. Alexander respected her fears, but each passing day he felt more the need to shout to the entire world what he felt for her. September 28th was approaching again, and this time Alexander had very special plans for Emma's birthday. For weeks, Alexander had been secretly organizing the most special celebration he could imagine. He didn't want something ostentatious that would make her feel uncomfortable, but something full of love and meaning. He contacted Mr. Baker from the bakery, who gladly agreed to help with a special cake. He spoke with Rose, the neighborhood florist, to decorate the mansion's back garden with Emma's favorite flowers, jasmine and bougainvillea. He even convinced Mrs. Patricia Coleman, who had been the family's cook before retiring, to prepare the traditional dishes Emma remembered from her childhood in Virginia. Everything had to be perfect, because Alexander had made a decision that would change their lives forever. That night, in front of the few but dear guests he'd carefully selected, he would ask the woman who had filled his empty heart with light to marry him. The rings were already ready, stored in their blue velvet box in his desk drawer. The morning of September 28th, Alexander woke up with a mixture of nervousness and excitement that made him feel like a teenager in love. Emma had left early to do the market shopping, suspecting nothing of the preparations unfolding in the mansion. Alexander personally supervised every detail: the round table strategically placed in the garden, the warm lights that would create the perfect atmosphere at dusk, the small stage where a jazz trio would play Emma's favorite songs. Mr. Baker arrived at noon with the most beautiful cake he'd ever created. 3 tiers decorated with edible flowers and a sugar replica of the small farmhouse where Emma had grown up. It's so she remembers where she comes from, but also knows she has a beautiful future ahead, the elderly baker explained with eyes moist with emotion. Alexander hugged the old man, grateful for his understanding and affection toward Emma. Everything was turning out exactly as he'd dreamed. At 5 p.m., the first guests began to arrive. Alexander had carefully chosen the people who would be part of this special moment. There were Mr. Baker and his wife, Rose the florist with her family, Mrs. Coleman, some trusted employees from his hotels who'd come to appreciate Emma, and surprisingly, he'd managed to contact a distant cousin of Emma's, who lived in Richmond, and who'd agreed to travel for the occasion. Each person brought a simple but heartfelt gift. When Emma returned from the market at 6 p.m., the mansion was in total silence. "Alexander," she called from the entrance, puzzled by the unusual quiet. "Where is everyone?" She followed his voice calling her from the back garden, and when she opened the glass doors leading to the patio, she encountered the most beautiful surprise of her life. "Surprise!" all the guests shouted in unison, and Emma froze in the doorway with her hands over her mouth and eyes flooded with tears of joy and astonishment. "What is this?" Emma stammered, looking around the garden transformed into a paradise of lights and flowers. The jazz musicians began playing "The Way You Look Tonight," while the guests surrounded her with hugs and congratulations. Mr. Baker presented her with a spectacular cake, and Emma cried upon recognizing the little sugar house representing her childhood home. "I can't believe you remember what my house looked like," she murmured to Alexander, who watched her with eyes bright with love. "I remember every word you've told me, every story you've shared," he responded, taking her hand. "Tonight isn't just your birthday, Emma. It's a celebration of the extraordinary woman you are, surrounded by all the people who love you." Emma's cousin Grace approached with tears in her eyes. "My dear, when this man called me and told me how special you are to him, I knew I had to be here," she said, hugging her tightly. "Your parents would be so proud of the woman you've become." Emma couldn't stop crying with happiness, feeling for the first time in 10 years that she wasn't alone in the world. The party unfolded like a beautiful dream. Emma danced with Mr. Baker, listened to funny stories from Mrs. Coleman, received blessings and good wishes from each guest. Alexander had managed to create exactly what she never knew she needed, a family of hearts who loved her for who she was, not for what she had. When it came time to cut the cake, the musicians fell silent and Alexander asked for everyone's attention. "Friends," he began with an emotional voice. "Exactly 1 year ago, on a night like this, I discovered that the most extraordinary woman in the world had been living under my same roof, without me being intelligent enough to see her." Emma looked at him curiously, wondering where his words were heading. "Emma taught me that true love has nothing to do with money, with social position, or with appearances. It has to do with finding the person who makes your soul feel complete." The guests listened in religious silence, feeling the depth of emotions emanating from Alexander. Emma began to tremble, sensing something extraordinary was about to happen. Alexander slowly knelt in front of Emma, taking from his shirt pocket a small blue velvet box. The guests held their breath, and Emma felt her legs turn to jelly. "Emma Rose Mitchell," Alexander said with a trembling but firm voice. "A year ago, you asked me if I could sit with you, and that was the night that changed my life forever." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring with a diamond that shone like the Miami stars. "Now I'm asking you, would you want to sit with me for the rest of our lives? Would you want to be my wife, my companion, my best friend, the love of my life?" Emma brought her hands to her face, sobbing with pure emotion. "Would you marry me, my love?" Alexander finished with tears rolling down his cheeks. The garden was shrouded in expectant silence, only broken by the sound of distant ocean waves. Emma looked around, seeing the faces full of love and hope of all the people who'd become her chosen family. "Alexander," Emma murmured with a broken voice. "All my life I felt invisible, insignificant, as if I didn't deserve to be loved." She knelt in front of him, taking his face in her trembling hands. "But you taught me I'm worthy of love, that I'm special, that I deserve to be happy." Tears ran freely down her cheeks as she spoke from the deepest part of her heart. "You taught me that true love doesn't know social differences, that two hearts can find each other no matter where they come from." The guests were completely spellbound, witnessing the purest love they'd ever seen. "Yes, Alexander," Emma finally said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I want to marry you. Yes, I want to be your wife, your companion, your love for all of life." The garden exploded in shouts of joy and applause while Alexander slid the ring onto Emma's finger. They stood up and kissed passionately, sealing their commitment before God and all the people who loved them. The jazz musicians began playing at last, while couples danced under the stars. Alexander and Emma swayed slowly in the center of the improvised dance floor, lost in their own bubble of happiness. "Is all this real?" Emma whispered against Alexander's ear. "It's not a dream I'm going to wake up from." Alexander held her tighter against his chest. "It's more real than anything I've lived before," he responded. "You're my reality, Emma. You're my present and my future." She separated slightly to look into his eyes. "I love you so much that sometimes my chest hurts," she confessed. "I've loved you since that day in the kitchen when you asked if you could sit with me." Alexander smiled, remembering that moment that had changed everything. "And I've loved you since I saw you blow out that candle wishing you wouldn't feel so alone anymore," he told her. "Your wish came true, my love. You'll never be alone again." They kissed again, aware they'd found in each other their soulmate, their life companion, their true home. The wedding was celebrated 3 months later in an intimate ceremony on a Miami beach, with the same dear people who'd witnessed their engagement. Emma wore a simple but elegant dress, with jasmine flowers in her hair, while Alexander waited for her at the end of the petal path, with eyes full of tears of happiness. Mr. Baker was the one who walked her to the altar, fulfilling the role of the father she no longer had. "I'm giving this extraordinary woman to the luckiest man in the world," the elderly Baker said with an emotional voice. The vows they exchanged were written by themselves, full of promises of eternal love, mutual respect, unconditional support. "I promise to love you not only on easy days, but especially on difficult ones," Alexander said. "I promise to be your refuge when the world becomes too heavy." Emma, with a trembling but sure voice, responded, "I promise to grow with you, dream with you, build a beautiful family with you. I promise that every day I spend by your side will be a new reason to thank God for bringing us together." When the priest declared them husband and wife, the sun was setting on the horizon, painting the Miami sky with the most beautiful colors they'd ever seen. The scent of chocolate and vanilla filled the kitchen of the new house Alexander and Emma had built together. Smaller than the mansion, but infinitely fuller of love. Emma, now 33 years old, smiled as she finished decorating a birthday cake with 2 small candles. "Mommy, Mommy," shouted a little voice from the garden. "Daddy's teaching me to plant flowers." Little Olivia, 2 years old, ran toward the kitchen with her hands full of dirt, followed closely by Alexander, who was carrying their younger son Nathan, barely 6 months old, in his arms. "This girl has a gardener's soul," Alexander said, tenderly kissing Emma's cheek. "Just like her mommy." Emma looked at them with her heart overflowing with happiness, remembering that lonely night 6 years ago, when she'd blown out a candle wishing she wouldn't be so alone anymore. "Do you know what day it is today?" Alexander asked Emma, as they put the children to bed that night. "6 years since you asked me if you could sit with me," she responded, snuggling into his arms. "The best day of my life," Alexander murmured against her hair. "Thank you for teaching me that true love isn't sought. It's found in the most unexpected moments." Emma looked up at him, her eyes shining with the same tenderness as always. "Thank you for seeing in me the woman I didn't even know I could be." They kissed softly, grateful for the path that had led them to that perfect moment of family peace. Outside, the Miami stars shone, witnesses to a love that had begun with a simple question and had become the most beautiful story they could have imagined. This incredible story teaches us that sometimes the person who will change our life forever is closer than we imagine, waiting for us to open our heart. Emma and Alexander show us that when 2 souls meet, they can create something beautiful together, no matter where they come from. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss more stories that touch the heart. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in true love. May God bless your heart with a love as pure and true as Emma and Alexander's. May you never stop believing in the miracles that can happen when you least expect them. Remember, you are valuable, you deserve to be loved, and your love story is waiting to be written. Until next time, and may God be with you always. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special, leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.